good afternoon. It's the After Service Podcast. I'm Joe. It's Pastor Brian.
Pastor Brian, where we are this week, we are looking. We're continuing on with our series on what have we said before? Rethinking the gospel. I think, and as I said on Sunday, I think we need to rename this to Rethinking Partisan Politics. I think that's a little bit more accurate.
Right. I think that's helpful to people who are maybe new to the series. When we're reading the book Political Gospel, Public Witness in a Politically Crazy World, that's the title of it. And so often when we hear the word politics, we equate that to partisan politics versus politics as it's really defined, which is how we run kind of the public functions of our society for the greater good of all.
Right. And so we're trying to rethink that. He's in this book, he's set up really two ways, and he's offering a third. The two ways in the book, one is to pick a side, right or left. The second way is what he called in this chapter nonconformist. I would argue a better phrase for it is uninvolved or silent. And then the third way is to be, he doesn't really have a phrase for it, I guess, but maybe kingdom advocate, kingdom mindset, something like that.
Yeah. It'd be nice if we could just if we had little perfect little boxes to put things in. Actually, as I'm looking here, citizenship. It's faithful citizenship.
Oh, yeah, kingdom citizen. All right, I like that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the graphic right now in the book. So we've got option 1, which is nonconformity, option 2, which is nationalism, and in the middle is faithfulness and citizenship.
Yeah, I just think nonconformity is not the right phrase. I don't think it's communicating what he's saying. I think uninvolved or silent is a better word, better phrase.
I agree with you on that, and we'll get to that. So we are going to enter into chapter 3, which is called Reimagining Politics with Jesus, Submission and Subversion in the Modern World. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. You described this. By full disclosure, we've been talking now for like 20 minutes, and we just got started on the podcast because it is, as you described it, a
spicy chapter. There's a lot of stuff here that we kind of both went, ooh, that's it. How do I think about that? And we spent 20 minutes talking about, well, should we talk about that or should we not talk about that? And in the end, we kind of decided, we're going to talk about it. Just going to talk about it. Again, I want to remind everybody that we're processing this in real time as well. Yeah. So just because we say something this week, we may after by the end of the book go, I'm not sure I agreed with my viewpoint back in chapter 3, because we're learning, and that's the whole point, is we're learning how to really think through how to be a kingdom citizen in a world in a country that's hyper partisan.
Yeah, and my hope, and I know your hope, is that you guys are getting our unpolished processing and internalizing this information. We're not coming in with an exact understanding. And me in particular, I haven't read the whole book. I don't think you've read the whole book yet either. But
I thought I had, but no, I've only read one more chapter after this, and then I stopped because I thought this is really good. Let's do it with Joe.
So there may be things that as we're processing, discussing, that 2 chapters from now we'll go, oh, we got set up. Okay,
Possible.
That's where he was going. So I would say that both of our intention is to come into this open, ready to learn, and to the extent that we can, subverting our natural tendency to make assumptions that fall in line with the way we want to see the world.
And it is a good thing to read stuff that at the end of the book you go, I don't agree with much of what I read. There's nothing wrong with that if you're looking at it critically, because you need to hear other people's perspectives, and even ones you don't agree with. So It's a good thing.
Yeah. I think we all, our faith is stronger ultimately when we have some exposure to things that force us to think,
Hmm.
to ponder, that challenge us. It's just kind of like a marriage relationship where, every few years there's going to be a wall in front of you, and then you work,
Hmm.
and then you either get stronger or you don't. So the challenges are going to be there. How you approach those challenges is going to define your growth.
Yeah.
So,
So in text, um, one of the first things, and I don't really have a particular order for any of these. One is just this phrase: what you get angry at reveals your loyalty." I found that particularly helpful.
yeah,
What does I think that's a true statement. Well beyond it, when do you get angry? And when you get angry at something that's out of the blue, that doesn't seem to have a disproportionate anger at something, it's like, why are you really that worked up over that?
yeah.
Is it hurt? Is there a fear? Is there undue you care about that particular topic? Why? I think that's just always a good question.
Can I read the quote from the book on that? It's a great quote. Anger reveals our loyalties, whether we admit it or not. If we have fractured relationships because of politics, we need to ask whether we are placing too much hope in political promises.
Wow. See, that's one that really should tweak us, right? Is if you're getting really worked up over politics, you need to at least be asking yourself, have you really put too much hope in that?
Can I?
That
I'd like to tell a quick story. This
you
goes
we're gonna take time, make our time on this episode.
so I think it was 2004, 2003. I worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation on a contract basis, and it was during the heat of the Kerry Bush presidential election, and I subscribed to the Oregonian. I read it every day. I was just very involved in consuming information about that specific election. And I found that it was really unhealthy for me
Mm-hmm.
because I was so vested in that it really colored my interactions with people at work, because people were very demonstrative in who they supported or didn't support. And there was literally a guy coming around and telling people how to vote if you were part of a given union.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me feel nauseous. But what it told me is that I was unhealthily invested in politics where attention should have been placed elsewhere.
And with all, and I think that's a really good thing, but don't you think that's 1,000 times worse today with social media? I think so.
Yeah, because if you think about it, when you go back to 2003, which is hard to believe, the internet was still in its infancy, right? A lot of things changed with. Say again. Sorry.
Social didn't exist, I don't think. I don't even think Facebook was around at that point.
No, MySpace was. MySpace was around.
So, oh,
But
few
it was.
people. Yeah.
It wasn't engaging people in the same way.
Yeah.
And we also have to remember that after September 11th, the way that we consume or the way news is presented and the way we consume it changed dramatically, because we went to a 24-hour news cycle with that event. So those things were new at the time, and then you look at it's 20 years since the story I just told, and you go, okay.
Yeah, because you could get the paper, you read through the paper, and then you're done consuming the news, except for maybe an hour in the evening, where people today can consume it all the time, literally all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course, all the news is far more hyped up, which we're going to get to that topic as we go. But yes, it just gets all worked up, and it does affect your relationships. right. Which kind of gets to something that one of the things that it tweaked my nose on is just like, this is why and I would argue our church as well has come to the stance of what he puts in as the second place. We are not a partisan church. If anything, we're more of an uninvolved, silent church. I don't preach about politics. I don't talk about politics because I don't want to cause division in my church. I don't want to get people to not listen to my message about the gospel because they don't like my politics.
Yeah.
So I don't talk, which is one of the things, the quotes he has here is some Christians frustrated when they see people equating Christianity with our nation, which I do, and respond with, he puts the phrase nonconformity, I would argue silence or non-involvement. That is to say, continuing with the quote, that is to say, they say nothing about politics because the quote, two should not be mixed. They say we are advocates, which is what I'm saying, advocates for God's kingdom, and that needs to reign in people's hearts. Just work for the new heavens, or to put it in my words, just preach the gospel, get people saved. All that matters is eternity. And I'm like, man, that's me. I don't want. There are people in our church who are on both sides of the aisle, and I don't want to get them upset. And I know if I talk about politics, I'm going to upset one of the two sides. Or both.
Yeah. You've probably heard the difference between a peacekeeper and a peacemaker. If not, I'll just briefly go over that.
Back phrasing how it goes.
Well, the peacekeeper is somebody who doesn't want to introduce conflict. They want to keep it so people are civil. But a peacemaker is going to work towards helping to resolve the conflict so that there is peace versus a kind of false peace. And that's where I see when he uses this term nonconformity, or as you said, I think I prefer uninvolvement or silence, is there's some discernment in there. Where are we just trying to maintain the peace that we have? I'm putting peace in quotes. Are we working towards resolving that? I would argue that this podcast is intended to be a peacemaking opportunity.
Yeah. It's, as a pastor, there's a part of me that would be so easy to, but I made this choice a long time ago, to be partisan. Oh, it'd be so easy to do that, right? And so this is what frustrates me when I watch these little clips. There was one on the YouTube not too long ago where it was this religious political conference, and it was a bunch of pastors talking about how other pastors aren't talking about politics, and they did it because, and they say it's because they're afraid. And I'm like, that's not the reason. No, it'd be much easier for me to not be silent.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that came into my mind, which is the idea that by not taking an absolute stance, you are demonstrating weakness.
Right, that's their viewpoint.
Right. So you either tick off the 50% that don't agree with your position on this side, or the 50% that don't agree with your position on this side, or you tick off everybody by falling in the middle somewhere and taking a nuanced viewpoint.
Right. I mean, because I could easily upset both sides. There are things I could say that would upset the Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
And the frustration I have with his viewpoint, and again, we're processing this in real time.
Yeah.
His frustration is, it's like, I know that if I'm communicating about politics, then when I talk about Jesus, if those politics don't line up with the person I'm talking to, there's no way they're going to listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. because in part because it's so emotional right now, wherever side you're on, that all you're going to, it's just going to be the static of emotion, and they're not, which is why, as he said here, I'm frustrated that people are equating Christianity with national politics. Absolutely. That bothers me. And so I'm trying not to do that. And he's trying to say there's another way. So let's see.
There was one thing he said, and I'm trying to find it right now, but it was the idea that there's an expectation of, I think, politics, a political posture or position is what defines who you are as a Christian versus your Christianity defining how you interpret the politics.
Yes, I like that. I don't remember exactly where you are, but I really do think that's important. I've thought that for a lot of things. What really is your defining identity, and I think a lot of people have in a lot of things, whether it's their political party or whether it's their job or what movement you're a part of. That's who I am. I am this. And so if you criticize whatever that is, you're really criticizing them personally.
Right.
Right. So this is why, for example, as one person I was listening to said, we Christians, you literally cannot say the phrase, I love you, gay person, but I hate your sin. Because for them, that's the same thing. That is part of their identity.
Right.
You can't split it apart for at least them. Now, you may be able to think that way, but they do not. So they literally do say, here, you hate them.
Right. That's how it's processed.
That's processed. That's their.
Here's the quote.
Good.
Typically, political discipleship is being told, and I put discipleship in quotes, is being told what to think about certain issues, rather than beginning with the foundational principles of political theology. This is backwards. We have to work up from the foundation rather than down from the issues.
And that was really helpful for me in helping me think maybe a little bit, move forward a little bit from where I've been. And my comment to myself about that particular comment was, so is what he's saying is that we need to be doing political discipleship, and in political discipleship, as he's going to go on, is teaching people how to understand how the present authorities and culture relate to God's authority and culture.
Right.
Is that what
I think so. I think it's the idea that rather than being told that the prism that our prism starts with what our position has been told to us, like this is how you're supposed to believe in order to disciple. We have to start with the idea that, okay, clean slate. If we start with the idea that we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven first, then move through that and set aside what nationalism is, because nationalism, the nation that we live in is really secondary to, right?
Right. And what that gets to is things like, I have a little bit, but not enough. It's really talked about, preached on, how does authority work in terms of God dealing with human authority and that whole structure. And I suppose what he's talking about is help people get that. How do you as Christians relate to human authority?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's what, because I had someone push back a couple of weeks ago on one of the things I said about who's president. And he was like, wait a minute, are you trying to say that even though the president whoever gets elected may not be a good person, that God wanted that? And I'm like, okay, that's not exactly what I meant.
No, but so I get it.
They're processing because they've never heard this.
And I think that's a fair question to ask, because It's the same question that I asked, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that to some extent that exposes something he talks about in the book here, that if somebody that is not of our party or not the person that we wanted in the office is elected, that we panic. That instead of believing that God can work through this person, as flawed as they may be, that that we automatically start with the assumption that the world is going to fall apart and all the bad things that could possibly happen are going to happen.
Right. Exactly. And I think, where's the quote that he talks about that if you hear it? Oh, I like this because this goes very much against the grain of much of what we think in our culture. The biblical perspective is that governments don't exist first and foremost because we've made a social contract. That's what your political science classes will say. Or an elected ruler. It's not because of an election, or because they control the army or the police, or they cheated or whatever it is. They exist because God established them in that position.
Yeah.
To promote common good. It's like, it gets to a very thorny issue with we as Christians, is the whole sovereignty and providence and free will.
Well, look at Old Testament Saul, right? If we look at him, God put him in that position. He did. And then Saul screwed up, right? So,
and God removed him.
Yeah. So I think to me, that's just a great demonstration of how, even though God knows everything, right? But if it wasn't for Saul, would we have David? Without David, would we have Jesus? I had a counselor describe it to me this way, if you'll excuse the departure a little bit. I probably talked about my mom suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of her father. I found out that I had a cousin, and I was excited to know that I had a cousin, but it was also his granddaughter. And so it's like, can I be excited about a cousin that came from the line of this man that was so abusive to my mom, right? My counselor said, I want you to think about Jesus and his genealogical line and all of the sinners and murderers and terrible people above, right? So that's a demonstration of how God was able to use all these terrible people to affect bringing the Savior into the world. So it's a long way to look at it, but when we are so keyed into responding and reacting to what should we be panicked and afraid of today, we are in that mindset right now.
Right.
Instead of taking the longer kingdom view of, I know God is going to use this for good. I don't know when, I don't know how. I just know and trust him. That he's going to do that. So if you don't like Biden or you don't like Trump, okay, God's still going to use that person.
Right. And just remembering that, as he puts it here, no human government is ever going to fully establish justice and remove oppression. It's not going to happen. That's one of the foundational things we say as Christians, is that only God does that. That's the whole problem, is that we don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't put your hope in that. Put your hope in Jesus and recognize that they're going to be held accountable. They're going to be held accountable for whatever they did.
Yeah.
Does that put us more as a... do you think he's trying to... I had this thought as we were talking about here a moment, is like, do we have more of a prophetic role? Meaning looking back at the Old Testament going, okay, how did some of the saints there relate to the governments of their day as models? Like, how did Daniel relate to a very corrupt government? How did Isaiah, Joseph? How did Joseph relate to? Clearly he was in a country that was not Christian, did not worship the God of his God. How do you deal with that? That's an interesting discussion to me.
Right. And those are models of subversion that Joseph, from his position, was able to really influence this the leadership of that country.
And Daniel too.
Right. Yeah.
I think, and he hasn't brought this up. Maybe he did a little bit. One of the things I can't remember where it is in Scripture. I'll have to look it up. I think it was in Jeremiah. It said that you're going to be in that nation, Babylon, for a long time. So work for the good of that nation.
Sure. Yeah, I think. Well, if it wasn't Jeremiah, then it was one of his contemporaries.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. I can look it up, but I don't take the time. It's in there, and we're going to have to talk about that eventually.
Yeah. If you just look at how long were they in Babylon and the nature of the despair that they felt, and if we put our own thrashing in partisan politics into a similar context, right, as them in Babylon, and it's like, we need to stop whining, right? We are in a much better position, a much stronger position with, we are blessed beyond measure. And it's like we are trying to put ourselves in this position of being put upon. No matter where we stand in this kind of partisan political discussion, we want, for some reason, to be the victim so that we can cry out that we are victimized, right? So we cry out, we are under somebody's thumb. And if you really believe that, then it tells me a little bit about the nature of your faith, because you're a victor.
More than conquerors through Christ.
Right.
There's no victimhood for Christians. They're not victims. But if you think you are, then we need to work on your identity.
Yeah. So that might be kind of, I don't know if he ever gets into that. But to me, that's almost foundational, right?
I feel like a lot of this should end up, and that's part of the things I'm working towards, is trying to translate what he's saying into the framework of what I already know is true. So what is he trying to get at? I think he's getting at identity. How do we deal with authority? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So we're about out of time, but we do have the opportunity. I want to leave us the opportunity, as you are watching this as we are processing this, that we're going to come back and kind of revise our thoughts probably as we gain more information.
Right. And we didn't even get through all this chapter. There's a couple of more notes here. I'm like, didn't get that one. That's okay. We're not in a rush. So if you have comments or thoughts, or just what is it you're working through on this stuff, please let us know. I appreciate your feedback, because we're all here to learn.
Amen.
All right. Thanks for joining us. And we'll see you on Sunday.
See you Sunday.